Okay, that's 10 o'clock. Hello, good morning. Welcome to this, the next episode in a series of technical insight videos from DWSN. Not sure where to start, really. Just
Johnny, I
say
think you're
hello.
taking my role here. I'm supposed
Oh
to be
yeah,
doing this
so
bit. You
so
do the
yeah,
rest of it.
I will hand over
Stop
to
being
Owen
greedy.
to I will hand over to Owen for the introduction slides, and then you'll suffer me
Very,
for the main body of it. Owen,
very
over to
good
you.
of you.
You're right.
You go back
You're
to
right. You're
playing with
right.
your cat for a bit. Okay, welcome, folks. Yeah, good to have you all here with us today. Yeah, the latest, as Johnny says, in a round of sort of technical insight videos that have proved surprisingly popular so far. So, yeah, it's this one in particular is going to be about adoption agreements. So if you just flip on to the next slide, Johnny.
There we are.
Brilliant. Hang on,
Mm.
there we go. And those are the main presenter is Johnny. Hence why I have to do my bit now, just so you get your money's worth. I will be contributing as and when required during it, but Johnny is the expert in the room. So what he's going to go through is obviously an introduction to what are adoption agreements and understanding how they work. And then, what actual information do you get about them in a Con 29 DW? Because we often get questions asking for certain bits of information that can't necessarily be provided or can be. So we'll make that distinction. And then obviously at the end of this, we'll have time for questions. However, the question and answer function, which you've got the little Q&A function at the top of your screens, if you can use that at any point. So I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. So if it's particularly apt to ask that question at the time, we'll do that then. Otherwise, we'll address them all at the end. So feel free to put your questions in whenever you want to. And then at the end, we're going to have a poll live as well. So if you click on the polls button, then that will allow you to just give us some feedback about how it's gone. So whether you liked it or not, obviously, and the key one for us is what topics you might like us to cover next time, because that's the key thing, because we want to make sure we're talking about stuff you actually want to hear about. So yeah, then this has come off the back of that feedback from a previous meeting. So it's really, really useful to us. If you could spare a minute or so just to do that, that'd be wonderful. If you've been to one of these before, you'll know who we are. The Drainage and Water Searches Network, it's the trade organisation representing all of the compilers of the Con 29 DW residential and commercial in England. So yeah, that's who we are. And I think without too much further ado, because we've got a fair bit of content to get through, I'll hand over to Johnny.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Yeah, so again, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm doing this from home, as you may see. My partner also works in this room, sat in the corner there. And here we are, the day before Valentine's Day. I just thought I'd share you really quickly a story this morning. I asked a colleague to do some work for me this morning that's up against a deadline, and she kindly said, "Yeah, I can manage to get that done." And at the end of the call, I was on a video call with her. I sort of put my thumbs up and meant to say, "Oh, I love it. Thank you so much." And I instead said, "I love you," which made my partner's head twist around faster than you know what, and caused much hilarity on the other end of the screen with my colleague. So a Freudian slip on just about on Valentine's Day. So I may get in trouble for that later. Anyway, just to show we're all human. Understanding adoption agreements. So quite a heavy subject it can be. So I'm going to try and step you through it as best I can. And make things as clear as I can. I will keep saying certain things though that might get a bit repetitive, and so as always with these events, the slides will be and a recording of it will be available on YouTube afterwards on our YouTube channel. And should you need the slides independently, we can just send them to you. Just get in touch with DWSN afterwards. So section 104, sewers, and section 104. So before I start, you need to understand a little bit of background. The Water Industry Act is in existence from 1991, and it sets out the main powers and duties of all of us water and sewerage companies. And it, of course, as it sounds, relates to the supply of water and the provision of those sewerage services. And the S104 agreements are contained within this act. So just to cover off what is that? What is a Section 104 agreement? My slides are not advancing, which is not very helpful. There we go. What do you need to know about Section 104? Is a part of the Water Industry Act. It's a legal thing. It's not a choice of the water and sewage companies. It's a legal thing that's part of their responsibility for providing those services to you. And Section 104 basically is a legal document under that Act where the developer of a property and the water and sewage company enter into an agreement together. It relates to new sewers only, and it confirms how those sewers should be laid in the land that's being developed or built on, I guess we could say. The Section 104 agreement must be in place prior to any sewerage works taking place. So in other words, the developer must get permission to lay the relevant pipes, and it's to ensure that those pipes are laid to a certain standard. They must get installed and built to the correct standards contained within that Water Industry Act and the Code for Adoption, another sort of document that all the water companies adhere to. A Section 104 agreement, as I said, is usually signed in the early stages of a housing development, but that, of course, can last for several years. So until the water company, the sewage company are satisfied that that sewage network has been completed to the terms set out in the Section 104 agreement, they won't kind of get adopted or signed off, if you like, or invested. You may hear the word invested bandied around. It basically means the same thing, adopted. Excuse me. It's the developer's responsibility to process that Section 104 through to adoption. The water and sewage companies don't go out looking for, hey, who wants to build? It's up to the developers. They know that's part of their responsibility when they create a new estate and a new house or build houses. Our Con 29DW product will advise you on the status of that S104, Section 104. There are some other sections of the Water Industry Act that are relevant to sewers and how they're laid, so I'll just touch on those now. There are also some funky names, don't they? A Section 102, a Section 106, and a Section 185. I'm just going to touch on each of those now. A Section 102 allows a developer or even an individual to submit an application to a water and sewage company asking them to adopt an operational sewer that's already installed, a private operational sewer. So they perhaps buy a house, build a house, come into possession of a property, residential or commercial, and they say, that's already there, but can you please adopt it? Would you look after it? Because it is built to a certain standard. And that Section 102 can be applied for by the homeowner. Perhaps the developer's moved on. It's been a 5-year estate build, and you get wind, or a solicitor or conveyancer, you guys acting on a buyer's behalf, gets wind that's perhaps not adopted. It could be a couple of years later. So a Section 102 is often for a homeowner to apply for those pipes, if you like, in the ground to be adopted by the sewage and water companies. So Section 104 is generally for the developer to do. Section 102 slightly different. Perhaps the developer's gone, finished, cleared off, gone bust. Who knows? All sorts of things can happen. And a homeowner can submit a Section 102 to request that those existing unadopted sewers are adopted. Okay, but it will, of course, it's not a fait accompli. It will depend on how well that's operating. Is it built to a certain standard, installed to a certain standard? Those checks will still be made by the water and sewage company, quite rightly too. Slightly different, Section 106 is a right to what they call communicate with a public sewer. So Section 106 allows an owner or occupier of a premises with a private sewer or drain to connect into the public sewer. So, for example, if a new house is being built or a house is being extended, you may have to go through the Section 106 process to connect into the existing public sewer system. It may be nearby to the property. Of course, it's where we've got an infrastructure in this country that enables stuff like that. We want all of that to be good for people. So should you want to get a pipe into an existing sewerage system that otherwise would be private into the existing public system, then that's a Section 106, slightly different. It could be the property, perhaps, as an example, has got a septic tank. And in fact, you don't want your client doesn't want a septic tank going forward. They want to connect into the main network. And so that's a Section 106 that needs to be applied for. It could even be that the owner of a property comes across the fact that they're legally obliged to do that, actually. So if the property is within 30 metres of an existing public sewer, it could well be that there is a legal requirement for them to attach into that. So then a Section 106 would be needed. And finally, a little bit less common, a Section 185 relates to a sewer diversion. So if a developer wants to develop land and put some houses and stuff, but they need to move some pipes under the land, a public sewer, it's running through the land and they want to develop it, they have to apply for a Section 185, which would be to ask for the sewer to be altered or diverted elsewhere. All of these different agreements are entered into with the water and sewerage company for that particular area, not the local council. And so that's really important. Don't go off to the council with questions about this. This is to do with the water and sewerage company in that area, mainly the sewerage company, but there are, of course, NAVs and other areas where water-only companies are involved. So I'm just going to recap that. I told you it was a dynamic subject, so I'm just going to recap. Section 104 is an agreement relating to new sewers being laid in the land. Are they of a certain standard? Section 102 is an application that asks the water or sewage company to adopt sewers that already exist and are in use. Section 106 is an application for someone who wants to connect into an existing public sewer with what was private previously, or it's going to be private, would be private otherwise. And a Section 185 is an agreement asking for a public sewer to be diverted, maybe to allow development on a piece of land. It's worth noting something which Owen may be able to talk about in a second, just to give you a break from me, who can talk with some authority about, and that's that the private sewer transfer, which you may know about and which is often mentioned in our reports, of lateral and shared drains to public ownership, happened on the 1st of October 2011. And that had some impact on some S104s. If it was dated before 1st of July 2011 and connected to the public sewer before that date, it was automatically assumed to be vested and adopted by the water and sewage company. Owen, do you want to add anything to that, just about that?
Well, it's what you said. You talked about Section 102. That was that sewer transfer that happened then was a mass 102 agreement, a Section 102 agreement. So it's a retrospective adoption of all of those private assets into public ownership. So that was huge for people, because people suddenly had certainty over what they were responsible for and what they weren't responsible for, because prior to that they had all these issues, not understanding whether the sewer going through their garden was their responsibility or the sewage undertaker's responsibility or anything. So it caused all sorts of confusion. The idea going forwards that problem would go away and there'd be no more sort of private networks building up. However, in reality, that hasn't quite happened as they were hoping it would have done. Do we talk about that any further on in the slides, Johnny, or shall I talk about that now?
Yeah, let's go on and then we'll pick that back up. Yeah, you're right.
I'm also where we've had a question from Chris Pleasance. So actually, let's cover this one off now. There are numerous cases when a Section 104 agreement is not in place when sales of new builds are taking place. We're required to rely on the terms of the contract. The developer will complete the agreement in due course. There are obvious risks with this. Why do planners not insist on the 104 being completed before sales take place? Yeah, I mean,
we were going to talk a little bit about that, the potential for delay in this next slide, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is the point, but I don't, Chris, I'm assuming is referring to the fact that it hasn't even been signed. It's not even in place when the sales are taking place. We haven't even signed the Section 104 agreement, I'm assuming. Clearly, obviously, they might not have been adopted by the time sales are taking place. That's perfectly understandable. So I'm not quite sure. Chris, you might want to clarify. Are you referring to literally that it hasn't even been signed yet, or are you referring to the fact that they haven't been adopted? At that point, because that's a regular occurrence, and Johnny will move on to that now.
Yeah, I'll touch on that.
You carry on, Johnny, and I'll
carry on, and then maybe that question will get expanded, and we'll come back to it. Yeah. So I'm just going to show you a couple of typical responses to the S104 question within the Con 29 DW. your local Con29 DW provider, all of us are members of the DWSN, but whoever's relevant to the property, the area that the property's in, may differ slightly, but the common themes will be along these lines. Okay, so that they'll advise you of certain things for sure. Okay, the question in the Con29 is this: are any sewers or lateral drains serving the, I know you can all read the screen, but serving the development, or which are proposed to serve the property, the subject of an existing adoption agreement or an application for such an agreement? So there are common answers to this, which be very slightly different depending on the producer, but and this is quite a key question, because if there's no S104 in place, the homeowner within that development may end up liable for repair and maintenance of those sewers. So let's hope not, and perhaps that alludes to the question that was asked, but it's really key to get that. Now, it could be there are no such agreements, or it's not subject to a S104 agreement, excuse me, or it could say an S104 agreement is in preparation, it's underway. It could say that the S104 agreement is in place, and it could say that the sewers are vested by the undertaker. So horrible legal words, means adopted by the sewage and water provider, basically. So variations of all of those above. Sometimes there's maintenance of it in place for a certain amount of time that's invested by the developer to says, oh, we will look after those for 3 years or 5 years or something. Or it could be a bond which is in place so that if they're not suitable, there's a bond, almost like an insurance policy, that the developers have to pay and put in place to make them the pipes and sewers worthy. And some responses may advise that the foul and surface water sewers are dealt with separately. So I'm just going to expand on this a little bit. With new properties, it's quite common that a Section 104 agreement is not yet completed. And this could be where the question came from. But if the property being purchased is more than about 5 years old, and there's no suitable answer to this question, then as a purchaser's solicitor or conveyancer, you might want to inquire into that. Why isn't there an agreement? That would be great due diligence on your part. We'll answer it as best we can on the data we've got. But if it's more than 5 years old, so it's not a new build or more than a couple of years old, which gives that gap of time to allow that adoption agreement to get put in place, if there's nothing there, then it answers that on the question. That might prompt you to have a look. If the question is answered that there is no agreement in place, just check with the sewage undertaker whether they're planning to adopt the sewers and the pipes around that property. And if not, the purchaser of the house and perhaps the lender to the property, the bank, needs to be aware of that. Needs to be aware that the sewage undertaker is not planning to adopt for some reason. Quite rare, I think, but can happen. If it's an established development and the assets around the property are all public, this indicates that the sewers have all been adopted by the sewage undertaker, and so it may just sort of say, not applicable to the answer, or none, because the whole estate is already adopted. Everything's adopted there. So if an S104 is in place, the conveyancer or solicitor, you can request a copy of it from either the developer or the sewerage undertaker, and there may be a small charge. Each DWSN member may have a different, each sewerage company actually may have a different arrangement in place for this. There may be a small charge for a paper copy or electronic copy. It's a standardized document. It states where, once a developer has constructed the sewer to an agreed standard and maintained it for an agreed period, the water company will adopt it and it will become a public sewer. But before that happens, it's a private sewer owned by the developer. So it's really key to get a clear answer to this question. So our Con29 will advise if the properties that's being searched upon is covered by a S104 agreement. The response to question 2.6 will advise perhaps whether a bond was paid by the developer or if it's in maintenance period. And just to again repeat, that bond is intended to cover any costs that the water company might have if they didn't complete it to an agreed standard. So it's just a kind of an insurance policy, really. Reviewing that agreement, if you get a copy of it or want a copy of it, will provide the level of any bond that might be in place. So, yeah, that's it for that one. Did you want to go back to that question, Owen? Or
Yeah, well, no, it's been
on?
clarified. Yeah, that
Okay.
they're referring to the fact that the Section 104 agreement is not even in place at the point at which the sales are going through. I mean,
Yeah,
it's hard to say. I can't tell you why planners don't insist on it.
ahead of time.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not for me to say really. That's part of the planning process. But
I guess in their defence, slightly, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? They've got to have laid them
yeah,
and be operational and in use and to a certain standard, and only then would they apply for it, I guess,
and that might take a bit of
to get
time.
that
That's
in place, and that
probably
may take a bit of
yeah.
time. So that's why we're advising, depending on the age of the house, it may be that it's on its way, but you can ask to see if it's in preparation or if there's a bond in place or if it's during a maintenance period where it's getting checked out, etc. So
It's probably an issue that might come up more and more with the the
it might
extent that they're trying to increase
try
house
to
building at the
build
moment,
houses.
etc. So
Yeah.
exactly.
So a couple of things to be aware of. First thing you sort of should consider when it comes to Section 104 is the date of the agreement. So it normally takes a few years, maybe even I would say 3-4 years for Section 104 to be fully vested, in a development. So if you come across a Section 104 that is dated 3 to 4 years ago, don't panic about that. It's relatively normal. But Section 104, old Section 104 agreements that haven't yet been adopted by the sewerage company, especially those that are dated before 1st of July 2011, should cause some alarm bells to ring. They should have been swept up under that private sewer transfer of October, was it, Owen? October, November? Anyway,
Yes, it
they
was.
should have been swept up into that. And so anything laid before the 1st of July, those S104 agreements that were in place prior to that would have all have been swept and adopted over that blanket coverage. So if it hasn't been adopted, there must have been some complication along the way or got spotted as not good enough. Check that one out. That makes sense? As a reminder, Section 104s only relate to sewers, not lateral drains. So I'm very conscious of all these very wordy and trying to make it stick, but it's difficult to not be too dry on this. But properties built after the 1st of July 2011, so that's the sort of deadline thing. Take a little bit more care when you're looking into that. The sewers will only become the responsibility of the water and sewage companies if there's a Section 104 agreement in place. They won't have been captured in that big sweep up. And those sewers will have to have been built to an acceptable standard to get adopted. There may also be a maintenance period in which the water and sewage company will visit the development and confirm they're happy with it. But if that's so, and that's in the data that the Con 2029 DW accesses, we'll put that against the answer. So in maintenance just means it's underway, getting sorted. Should be fine, but only when they confirm they're happy would that Section 104 agreement be in place. And if it doesn't, if they're not happy, it's not built to a certain standard, and we have a duty to society, really, I guess, the water and sewage companies, to ensure that is done. Then it'll remain the responsibility of the developer. 102s. Section 102s, remember, is an option for the home buyer. When the Section 104 hasn't been adopted and the developer's no longer around or disappeared, or God forbid gone bust, or is finished their whole and they move on. So the home buyer can apply for Section 102 to request that those unadopted sewers are then adopted. Again, an inspection will have to take place, and the adoption will only take place when the sewers are accepted to be a certain standard. And then finally, on this, Section 24 sewers, another number for you. These are really old public sewers that generally run down the back of properties or down the side of it, and people won't intentionally build over them if they can help it, of course. And they're very common in properties built around 1937. So just when Owen was starting his career in the industry,
Right, yeah.
October 37. So coming up 100 years, maybe 90 odd years. They fall under the care of the water and sewage company, even though they might be within a property boundary, for example. Again, as a society, we can't go back forever and apply the same rules. So really old Section 24 sewers, they're different. They're vested by the waterage and sewerage companies and fall under their care. In some cases, building extension perhaps, or just building over or close to those older sewers may be permitted. Okay, if it's not practical to put a diversion in, and the work can't be redesigned to accommodate it, it may be permitted. But it's worth pointing out, although we've always said check with the sewage and water company on this element, the old Section 24s, the final say on that lies with the building regs team of, for example, the local council or county council. If a building regs completion certificate is provided, then there's nothing more that you as a solicitor or conveyancer needs, really. I mean, tread cautiously, double check everything. Please ask the appropriate questions. I know you will. But it could be it relies on that building regs completion certificate. There's nothing else you need. You don't need a build over agreement then, or any insurance or anything, so long as that completion certificate's in place. Okay. Going to switch our focus just a little bit now to water adoption agreements, slightly different.
Just 1 second, Johnny, while we're
Yes.
talking about, just to find another question while we've got it from
Sure.
Michelle, who I know well, actually, bizarrely. Our sons play football together, who knew? So thanks for that, Michelle. Can a home buyer only rely on Section 102 if the developer has gone out of business? I came across a property last year where the Section 104 agreement was dated 2004 and still not adopted, but the developer's still in business. So, I mean, the reasons for that could be, any number of different things. Sometimes you get these developments, massive multi-phase developments where, you're doing phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and they don't all get adopted till the whole thing is done in one go. I don't know whether that's the case in this particular example you're giving, but I mean, the home buyer can apply for a Section 102. I would imagine anyway, if the Section 104 is for 20 years. Sounds to me like something's gone horribly wrong with that particular example. I mean, first things first, I'd be questioning the Severn Trent in your particular case, I'm guessing. What on earth has gone on with that one?
Yeah.
But because that's a ridiculous length of time for anything to be in place like that.
I mean, as with all these things, administratively wise, there'll always maybe a small backlog. Let's be honest. We've all got emails in our inbox we haven't yet dealt with. But yeah, that's a very extreme case. Something's gone wrong there.
That's a 20-year Section 109
backlog.
That is,
yeah,
that's a serious. There's not a 20-year backlog in this.
No. Because it would come up more often, obviously.
So I'm guessing in those instances, a homeowner could apply for Section 102 if nothing else than to prompt the water company to go, why on earth hasn't these things been adopted under the Section 104 that's in place on the development? But that's a bit of an assumption on my part.
Yeah. Okay, great question. Yeah. Okay, water mains and adoption, a little bit different. The Water Industry Act we've spoken a bit before at the start, the WIA, and that sets out the main powers and duties of the water and sewage companies relating to the supply of water as well as sewage services. Now, there are two options for laying mains in new housing developments, and they are self-lay providers, SLPs, or the water undertaker. So water adoption agreements are only needed if the SLP has been responsible, the self-lay provider, for laying those pipes. And that SLP needs to be, as I'm sure you're aware, there's some red tape here. They need to be accredited with the Lloyd's Register Water Industry Regulation Scheme. And any work undertaken needs to have met the requirements of the specific water company's self-laying of water mains and services guidelines. So there's a few safety nets in place to again ensure that work is done to a certain agreed standard. But it's the self-lay providers or the water undertaker themselves. They're a bit more straightforward, water adoptions, a bit more straightforward process. The new mains can't be connected to the public network unless they're built to that exacting standard. And before the new mains is connected to the public network, that self-lay provider, the SLP, will need to complete all sorts of pressure and bacteriological testing, some word like that, bacteria testing, and then they connect it. They're adopted as when they become part of the public network. Make sense? So slightly different. Okay, we're getting there, guys. We're getting towards the end. So, water adoption agreements. Here's a typical answer. So, the question 3.3, you can read it on the screen there. Is the water main serving or proposed to serve property subject of existing adoption agreement? Basically, yes or no. Majority of responses will be no, as by the time the property is ready for selling, but it does relate to that question we had earlier, by the time it's ready for selling, the new water mains will have been connected. I mean, I can't just say don't worry about it, but any developer who hasn't done this, of course, shouldn't be selling houses. I mean, it's obvious to state. But if the response is yes, it's worth checking that out with the developer on the status of the adoption. Oh, okay, why is that? So the majority of responses will be no. Some Con29DW providers within our group may advise if there's a bond in place for this as well. So similar to the bond for new sewers, it's intended to cover any costs that might come up should the water mains not have been installed or created to an agreed standard. But the agreement will again detail that and how much, the level of bond that's in place. So check our question 3.3 on the report, and if the response is no, then it's unlikely that you'll need to that a bond is needed anyway. So remember on the previous slide I said, once connected, the new water mains are adopted and will be part of the public network. Great. Okay, so a couple of common queries that our members come across. So probably the most common one, how do I get a copy of the agreement? So if an agreement exists and is in place, you can request a copy from the developer. They should have a copy of it, or the water and sewage undertaker. And again, as I've said before, there may be a small charge for that. Everybody's slightly different, but there may be a small charge. When will the agreement be in place? Again, Owen's friend said exactly that thing. Hang on a minute, it's been 20 years. It might be sometimes that we're unable to confirm when the agreement will be in place because it's still under negotiation. It's still being talked about or is in a period where it's not yet been decided. So it kind of either exists or it doesn't, except for these extreme cases, 20 years old. Hang on a minute, something a little bit fishy there, a little bit different. When will the sewers be adopted? Why the delay in adoption? Well, it can take a couple of years. It can take up to sort of 4 years for Section 104 to be adopted. So if you come across one that's dated 3-4 years old, don't panic too much. Yeah, that's fairly typical. Because there is no fixed date for adoption. It can depend on all sorts of things like when the development enters its maintenance period, whether any remedial work has been identified and is required. So it isn't unusual for it to take a couple of years. But as I said on the previous slide, if the property is 5 years old or older and it's not there, then it's worth checking it out. Why are the foul sewers adopted, but the surface water sewers are still under the agreement? There's a couple of reasons for that. The foul sewers, remember, probably transferred in 2011 as part of that whole transfer carry on. As they drain into the public sewer network. But it could be that surface water sewers might drain to a SUDS agreement or a SUDS feature on the estate, on the build. So they weren't eligible to transfer. That may change in the future, but they might still be under some sort of an agreement. If it's been that way for a number of years, then it's all that can happen really is contact the developer for when they propose that anything that's missing is completed. What are the dates looking like? Okay, so
there's been one more question, Johnny, which is what's the best way to check the status of a Section 104 agreement? Is there a status checker of sorts, giving you the various statuses, or is it all done through the developer?
Wow. Okay. Well, if the status is known, it'll be answered on the Con29DW, of course.
Yeah.
if it's
But I mean,
known.
you can check with either party, I guess, with the developer or the
Developer
sewage
or the
undertaker.
sewage company,
They
yeah.
they
It's,
should be able to inform you.
we could put 10 different websites or phone numbers on here, but it'd be a bit chaotic. I hate to be, and I don't want to come across as lackadaisical on this. A decent Google search will find you the area of the sewage provider that can advise you about those. That's things like Section 104 agreements. They're normally called the developer services or such like. Owen, I don't know what your Seven Trents are called, but
Yeah, it's developer services where we
developer
are as
services.
well.
So
Yeah.
Anglian Water that I represent, that's developer services. Yeah. So and Con 29 might be your first port of call, of course, should you have bought one, which I hope you all do. But yeah, the sewage company, if the developer doesn't know, we're trusting here. I haven't bought a house for many years myself, but we're trusting here the developer's got a comprehensive and well-maintained administrative service for all their builds. Good,
I think
good luck with that.
it really is.
Yeah. Any more questions you want to pick up, Owen?
There are no more questions on the chat at the minute. I don't know if there's any more. I thought it was probably worth very, very, very quickly, because we're running over time as well. So I appreciate if people are wanting to leave, they can do. But to explain, obviously they had this this massive sewer transfer previously, with the aim that we'd have no more build-up of a private sewer network going forwards, and it would all be really clear. And it hasn't panned out like that at all. I thought it worth giving a very quick explanation of why that was, because the ambition at that point was that we'd have a set of mandatory build standards that would come in. And you would have to build to them. And because those mandatory build standards, if they were met, the sewerage undertaker would have to adopt when a Section 104 agreement went in place. At the minute, you generally only get a Section 104 adoption agreement if there's more than maybe 10 houses in a development. It's reasonable sized developments that you get Section 104 adoption agreements in. Now, if it was this mandatory build to any property, like one property being built in somebody's garden, being connected into mains, it would have been a Section 104 adoption agreement, and the sewage undertaker would have to adopt at the end of that period. It wouldn't be optional, because they'd have met these build standards, and therefore it was all very straightforward and automatically adopted. To every new sewer that was effectively built would be adopted automatically, so there'd be no more build up of this private network. But the problem was the developers and the sewage undertakers could not agree this set of mandatory build standards. Everybody wanted something different. Water companies wanted more surety with higher bonds, developers wanted no bonds. Sewage undertakers wanted the pipes to run straight up the front of people's houses to make it the shortest length of pipe to maintain possible. Developers want them going around the back because they want to put lots of nice things they want to plant in front of the properties and stuff like this. So they just could not agree it in England. They did agree it in Wales, bizarrely, and so it happens in Wales, and they are doing all that sort of, those mandatory build standards are in place in Wales, but they're not in England. And basically the government looked at it, the developers went, look, you can't ask us to do this sort of stuff now. You want us to build more houses, you can't put anything in place that's going to delay that. And so basically this whole thing got kicked into the long grass, and as a result, they've never come into play, that set of mandatory build standards. So what is happening now is we're getting another build up of this private sewer network again. Of these ones they're too small to necessarily go into a Section 104 adoption agreement, and it's just carrying on and carrying on. So yeah, that's a bit of history for you. We have a couple more questions actually while I've been talking. I believe in developments in Wales must have a Section 104 in place before work is started. Is that correct? It's exactly what I just referred to. Yes, exactly that. So that mandatory set of build standards was put in place in Wales, so that automatic adoption under Section 104 is not the case in England. Some Section 104 agreements are registered at Land Registry, but not all. Any idea why some are and some aren't? I don't. Do you, Johnny?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, again, without wishing to sort of casually dismiss this, million housing transactions a year over the last 30 years. I don't know.
Administration.
It's just administrative gaps and holes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I can't think of a better explanation than that, because there shouldn't be any difference really.
Well, yeah,
but
not necessarily on our side. I mean, we all know about Land Registries delays and stuff at the minute. Not that I wish to badmouth the Land Registry while we're on here. there's plenty of the rest of you who do that for me, I'm sure. Anyway, moving on swiftly. Any more questions at all? I don't think so.
Okay.
Worth putting up the last slide there now. So if
Yeah.
you want to know who your local provider is, or the provider for the property that you're interested in for Con 2090W, just visit that website. There's a postcode checker on there that you can have a look and see who your local provider is. We put the recordings of these presentations up onto our YouTube channel as well, which you can get links to from that website too. So should you want to watch it again,
Should you want to?
please
Yeah, I
feel free.
can't imagine. Yeah. Should you have insomnia, then
Exactly, yeah.
watch these again.
No, but in all seriousness, a huge thank you for being engaged and asking questions and turning up and listening to us. It's really appreciated. And here's the poll. So the poll should be appearing on your screen now. Please feel free to tell us how satisfied or otherwise you are with the presentation, and more importantly, please tell us what topics you might want us to cover in the future, because that's the really important bit, to make sure we're talking about the stuff you want to hear about. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Thanks all. We'll speak to you again, I'm sure.